Wake up, Africa. Peter Ndoro and Asanda Peta are here to help you rise and shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time. Only on Channel Africa.
It's Wednesday, and at this time every week we do what we call Profile on Wednesday, the slot where we spotlight Africans who are redefining what's possible across the continent. And this morning our guest is Anne Githuku-Shongwe, who's the Director of UNAIDS Regional Support Team for East and Southern Africa. And from her early days in Kenya through the decades with the UN and the award-winning social enterprise Afro's Games, she's fused technology, gender advocacy and public health strategy to tackle some of Africa's toughest challenges. Her region remains the global epicenter of HIV. Adolescent girls and young women still account for more than a quarter of new infections and are 3 times more likely to contract the virus than their male peers. Yet Anne argues that investing in women's health and agency unlocks economic growth for everyone. With tightening donor budgets and a 2030 deadline to end AIDS as a public health threat, her work could not be more urgent. And we're delighted to have Anne with us this morning. Always good to talk to you. Thanks so much indeed. How are you?
Very well, Peter. Thank you so much for this. And thank you for showcasing this old man that you showed at the Comrades Marathon. I've been following that story, and it's really impressive, Peter. So keep pushing.
No, it is a wonderful story, and I think it's inspiring that really age isn't a thing. But anyway, let's go to you because your story is also quite inspiring. And let's start with you taking us back to Nairobi. What experiences or maybe even role models first ignited your passion for social justice and gender equality?
Well, thank you so much, Peter, for taking me back that far. I actually wasn't born in Nairobi. I was born outside of Nairobi in the Central Province, where my parents were born and grew up in the Mount Kenya area. And I was born just after independence. And so what I recall of my childhood was a lot of the energy around, a famous song about Kenyatta putting up the flag. In Kikuyu, we would sing this song, Kenyatta put up the flag. And I remember this as a little child, the sheer energy that came with freedom and independence, and the fact that Africans now had the opportunity to take over the reins of governance and leadership for our countries. Now, my mother was born in a political family. My grandfather was in the Mau Mau rebellion in the Mount Kenya area. He was very active there and continued into politics after, he was in the first cabinet of Kenya. And so we were always surrounded by politics and political work. And my mother and her siblings were very, very active. And we would run along and we understood that the stakes were very high and that it was important. And at any given time when we visited my grandfather's home, there were thousands and thousands of people. And I would always ask, what do they want? And it was always seeking some kind of support for services in one way or the other. And he was always solving problems. And I remember thinking, this must be an amazing position to be in, where you could actually do this. And my aspiration, in fact, believe it or not, was to be a politician at some point in my life. I'll come back to that story. And then fast forward, I went to high school again in Kenya, where I had this teacher who was teaching us theater, and I used to act. And in this, learned a lot about our anti-colonial pushed then, our real fight for justice. And I remember thinking, this can't be fair. And I then understood the role that women had played in our fight for social justice, in our fight for independence in Kenya, and how in their quiet way, very often in the background, not necessarily in the foreground at the time, were actually instrumental in ensuring that messages, free passage from across the country to one end of the country to the other for the Mau Mau, for example, was really initiated by women. And that for me was a huge inspiration. And then I we had an attempted coup in Kenya, and I ended up at the University of Swaziland, and I spent a year and a half there and met large parts of the anti-apartheid movement. And that's kind of how I suppose I bedded my life in this region. I ended up getting married to someone from the region, but it really, I got to understand what real fight for freedom looked like. And I saw what women did in particular. And I saw how women used both frontline power, but also soft power to really make a difference in life. And my life was changed from then on. There was just no way to look back and sort of pretend that this didn't happen. It was real. And I recognized that I was positioned to make a difference wherever I was. And so whether it was in university or afterwards, I made sure that we were fighting for social justice and using my voice in every way that I could, and my positioning in every way that I've been able to. And so it's a natural progress into the work that I have then done at the UN and in my own social enterprise.
So is that what convinced you to leave a comfortable consulting post in the US to join the UNDP in Africa? I mean, what convinced you that that was the right route to take?
Well, I think the first thing was that I recognized very early that I'm a macro impact kind of person. So I was very, very keen to see how we could change systems. And so when I was doing this management consulting work, and by the way, in the management consulting work, what was I doing? I was focusing on training of Africans. So I was in the US, I worked for the National Council of Negro Women first, and I was working with women in different African countries and funding their work in agriculture in particular in African countries, Nigeria, Malawi, different countries, Niger. And then I moved into this management consulting company where we gave scholarships to a lot of South Africans. So many South Africans who were in leadership positions from Eswatini, from Malawi, from Botswana. We gave scholarships Namibia to the US. And I was very, very involved in the engagement there. So even then, it wasn't just consulting, to sell Coca-Cola or to sell, it was really about social justice, really. And it was about preparing the future generation of leaders for South Africa, for Botswana, for Eswatini. And so UNDP, for me, became an opportunity to look at how I could go into a country and support that country's macro efforts to build its economy in a way that was available for every single citizen. And I did that. And so I started there. I worked in Eswatini in that role, and it really was able to support it. In fact, at the time, the women in 1995 and ensuring that the agendas of violence and social justice for women, women's access to economic power were on the agenda. So no matter where I was and the opportunity, at least
and we're having issues with the network for some reason, and you're freezing and we're not hearing you. So I'm going to put you back to our producers, and let's hope we can try and reconnect with you on a better line. We're talking to Anne Githuku-Shongwe, who's a real champion, activist, social justice defender, and has been working a long time in the space of HIV and AIDS, and particularly concerned about our young women that are very, very vulnerable in this area. There have been a lot of gains in the region that she's looking after, East and Southern Africa, and the interventions. And I want to start talking a little bit more about that work, actually, before we lose the signal. Anne is back with us. Let's talk a little bit about Eastern Southern Africa, which has managed to halve AIDS-related deaths since 2010. Yet what we're seeing is that young women still bear the brunt of new infections. What do you think are the structural drivers that are keeping this gender gap so wide in terms of young women being so vulnerable?
Thank you for keeping on to shine that light on this issue, Peter. That's the data that we have had up until these massive cuts that we saw earlier this year. You know, it's the same structural issues that we find across the board in terms of women's power. From economic power, many young women are engaged in economic transactional sex. You know, it was the old sugar daddy story before. It's still that. Many young women are victims of gender-based violence, where, especially in different African countries, access to education is an issue. You know, in some of our countries, only 40%, 50% of girls are in schools. And so where access is limited, the vulnerability is even higher increased. We've just released a study just in the last week that is basically showing, we're calling it the cost of inaction. And it's showing that actually the cost of not realizing the sexual and reproductive rights of young people, especially young women, like early pregnancy, costs South Africa about $10.3 billion in lost lifetime earnings, increased healthcare costs. It costs Zimbabwe 2.9 billion, right? So we've been looking at, just by not acting on this, what does this mean? It costs South Africa alone an estimated $12.4 billion in terms of data of GBV, the cost of GBV. And so what we know is that until we deal with the social norms that continue to drive the inequalities that have girls and young women so vulnerable, we will then see the level of HIV infections that we are seeing. And so an investment in young women and girls is an investment in a program that Education Plus.
All right, and the line keeps breaking so badly, and what we're talking about so important.
Girls in school, because we're...
Oh dear. All right. I'm gonna put you back to my producers again, and let's try again. Third time lucky, perhaps. All right. So we continue to explore some of the challenges that Anne is facing with her team, and I'm curious now. I mean, so much progress had been being made, but in January the US paused its foreign aid disbursements, and more recent cuts threatened things like PEPFAR support. And I just wonder how that disruption has played out on the ground already, if it has, and what contingency plans maybe could help stabilize drug supply chains. It is a huge one, and I think Donald Trump, as much as he's gung-ho and he talks about America first, there are real people's lives at stake, and so let's find out a little bit more about that. And third time lucky, let's see if we can hold the signal now. You mentioned this foreign aid disbursement disruption, Donald Trump, etc. Has that played out on the ground already? We were making such good progress. Has that been disrupted? Is there early evidence of that?
That very much so, very much so. The disruption is completely unprecedented. We did not expect this at all. I think the most painful part about this is that many of our countries in Africa were highly dependent on the US government's funding through PEPFAR and the USAID. We had countries like Tanzania, 90% of their HIV responses coming from the US government. Zambia, Malawi, 60-70% were coming from the US government. So the direct impact is that in countries where their drugs were coming from the US government, most countries had supply for 6 months to 8 months, at least for treatment. But the prevention side, which is the side where girls and young women in particular were getting their supplies of whether it was PrEP or the kind of economic opportunities to prevent the vulnerability. Those programs were impacted immediately. PEPFAR had a program called DREAMS where 2 million girls were on their programs. Those were dropped with immediate effect. And so we, in our estimates, are showing already from the data that where we were having about 3,500 new infections every day, these are estimated to rise already to 5,800. We are estimating an additional 6.6 million new infections by 2029, 4.2 million deaths. So in each of our countries, we are doing that data. It's early days to be able to give a comprehensive view, but what we know is that country by country, people who would ordinarily have showed up in clinics, particularly drop-in centers where there was concerns about human rights, or young girls who are concerned about the kind of stigma and discrimination that they experience, that they are not going into clinics because they don't feel that there is the kind of support that they have. And in some instances, they don't have the tools to support their prevention work. So we are very concerned about that, and we are seeing the impact very much. But I have to say, governments have stepped up significantly. And it's a rude awakening, but there has been a stepping up. Tanzania just announced a new levy for healthcare that includes a huge part for HIV. And that's important because domestic resources, domestic spending on HIV and on health is what will turn the corner for us and sustain our responses in the long term. And so we are seeing that. But we continue to look for resources to be able to fill in these gaps because the gaps are significant.
So much to cover in such a short space of time, but I am curious, particularly in the age that we're living in, a digital space and innovation. You have mobile games that tackle themes from gender-based violence to entrepreneurship. Right. Tell us a little about this digital disruption and Afros.
Oh, that was one of the most amazing parts of my career, I have to say, because we were able to reach hundreds and thousands of young people with important messages, which was my intention. I was frustrated that we were not getting to young people with the kind of messaging that was important. And so in partnership with multiple telecom companies, we were able to reach young people with messages on civic education, from HIV to prevention of GBV, my game Moraba, that we were able to reach hundreds and thousands of young people, teaching young boys about how what the age of consent means. So many boys, Peter, don't understand that having sex with an underage girl is statutory rape. They didn't understand that. And so providing information in a way that they can consume and start making better decisions and start shifting their own beliefs and social norms is so important. And that's what we were doing with Afros. This is work that we continue to do. When I was at UN Women, we were working on that. At UNAIDS, we have continued to work in partnership with other partners. We've got right now in Ethiopia, a chatbot that is helping young people to understand their risk factors for HIV. So AI is useful for us now, and we're beginning to explore how to actually do this much faster and help us to deal with the gaps that have been created by the loss of funding, where young people were physically taking people and informing people about where to access health services. We can now also use chatbots to be able to do that, or be able to use AI and different tools, mobile games, gamify experiences where you're getting rewards from practicing better, having better behavior. And so that is an area that we are investing in. And and really trying to expand in real ways. And my experience from Afros is very, very helpful there, even though I must say I have now aged quite a bit, Peter. So the young people in my team are the ones who are driving this work. And I keep saying to them, go out and test, check what young people really want, because you learn real hard truths directly from those who are the users. And the young people are the best to teach us this.
2030, an important deadline. UNAIDS insisting that the end of AIDS as a public health threat is still achievable by 2030. COVID was a disruptor, and now this funding has disrupted the cause further. Is 2030 still achievable, do you think?
It is achievable, but it means that we have to step forward in much more bold way, much bolder ways, because what we have as a massive opportunity now is that we have the tools, we have new drugs, new medicines that are long-acting, that if invested in effectively and implemented, we can turn the tide and reach that 2030 goal. So lenacapavir is a new injectable drug that for now just needs to be injected twice a year and would prevent HIV. So you imagine for these girls who are getting infected every single week, 3,000 of them, that could be prevented. The challenge we have is the cost of the drug. It's out of reach. At this point, it's 25,000, 40,000 per year per user. But yet we've got research that shows that it can be provided for even as low as $40 per year. That's affordable, that's reachable. And so we as Africans and we at UNAIDS and partners have a big campaign that we are pushing and really pushing for lenacapavir to be manufactured locally in ways that are much, much, much more affordable so that everybody can access it. Until then, and unless we embrace these new technologies, it will be very difficult for us to move at the pace that we've been moving and with the disruptions that we've been seeing for us to be able to achieve those objectives. And so it is possible, but it does require that we take very, very bold steps in new ways, and that all the partners who are with us, all the governments that are engaged, are really engaging in new ways, are investing in ensuring that we can end AIDS by 2030. We've made such huge progress. This is one area that we can say as Africans that we have led the way, and we can close the gap entirely if we do invest in the right direction and we target those who are most vulnerable, girls and young women. You know, the key populations who are very vulnerable, you know, whether it's gay men or sex workers or injecting drug users, these are most vulnerable to HIV. If they can access these tools, we can turn the tide for sure.
And I'm always so inspired when I've spoken to you. Thank you for giving us your time. We're going to have to get you on more regularly because there's so much to talk about and so much to keep in the news cycle so that people can get interested and take action. But thank you for joining us. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And please don't get tired. Keep going like that 83-year-old man.
Thank you so much, Peter. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Take care.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's Githuku-Shongwe, Director, UNAIDS Regional Support Team for Eastern and Southern Africa, talking to us about this very, very important work that she's doing. And I'm particularly interested in our young girls who are most vulnerable to HIV and AIDS. And we as a society really need to play our part in changing attitudes and making it unacceptable for young girls to be exposed in the way that they are. It's time for your news headlines. Here is Jwalani Tulo Mwebe.
We are